Hello everyone, I hope you're doing fantastic. I am doing great. And before I get into the nitty-gritty of what this video will be about, I just want to say it is beautiful outside. Not really, it's pretty windy. And obviously I am in Studio C. I missed being outdoor and just raving about books. So sit tight and please, let's get into it. Alright guys, so this video, it will be about all the books I read in the month of May. Now, I obviously did not reach the goal and May was simply busy, and I actually do see a lot of booktubers talk about how May just was crazy and hectic. But I mean, some of them did meet their goals and read all the books they had set themselves to read for the month of May, but not me. I'll tell you a little bit more about it. But I read a total of 7 books. One of them was a book club pick, my book club pick, so I can't wait to talk to you about all those books. As I mentioned, before I even talk to you about it, I wanted to tell you why the month of May was hectic. It was actually special because we celebrated my husband's 40th birthday. I literally celebrated this man like 3 times. So on the weekend of the 18th, we went to Montreal. It's just like an hour and a half away from where we live. We went there and spent time with his friends. Then after that, it was the 21st actually of May was his actual birthday. We just spent it with the family, as in him and I and our kids. And then I decided to do a party with all his other friends and his family members, because I wanted his family members who grew up with him, who saw him growing up, to actually, celebrate this fantastic man. So you can just imagine, we had all of that. It was fantastic. Anyways, hence the reason why I did not read all the other books. But you know what? Of course, I will bring them back in my June TBR. Best believe that I will eventually bring down my TBR. That is the general goal. Okay. All right, having said that, the first book I want to talk to you about is All That She Carried by Tia Miles. Now this book is a nonfiction book, okay, and this book is super fantastic. It is filled with so much knowledge, and of course, as you can guess, it is a slave narrative book. But the reason why I actually enjoy this book, I mean, every slave narrative book will always be different, even if the general idea is, about the history of Black people and the way and the injustices and the atrocities surrounding, Black people in the United States or in the Caribbean or in England or around the world. Every particular story that an author brings to light is always different. So this story, we follow Ashley. So Ashley is the daughter of Rose. And then we have Ruth, who's the granddaughter of Ashley, I believe. I have to make sure that I have the lineage correct. My great-grandmother Rose, mother of Ashley, gave her this sack when she was sold a 9 in South Carolina. It held a tattered dress, 3 handfuls of pecans, a braid of Rose's hair. So basically, that's the main story. So that's the goal. It's the sack and what the sack contained. And as you just heard, Ashley was being sold at 9 years old. And it's a story of many Black people during that time, okay? The author dives into the history of Indians, of Black people in South Carolina, of white people, and its intricacies, okay? And before I even get into it, I wanted to open this conversation with a few quotes, so that can help me situate myself how I'm gonna tell you a little bit more about this book. The history of Africans in America is brutal, but we have made art out of pain, sustaining our spirits with sunbursts of beauty, teaching ourselves how to rise the next day. Then, the suffering and persistence of Black people and of Indigenous people made this country possible, shaping its catastrophic boundaries, social structures, wealth distribution, founding documents, and everyday interactions in profound ways that can still be traced. And so she just talks about like everyday life of slaves back then, what they had, what they couldn't have, what they did to survive. And if she focuses on the family of Rose, Ruth, and Ashley, they were owned. Let's not talk about Ruth, but she's the granddaughter. So let's talk about Ashley and Rose. They were owned by the Middleton family. And at some point in this book, they said the Middleton family had about, they said, 50,000 acres worked by 800 enslaved people. And this is during the 1700s, okay? Just trying to imagine. And the author goes further to explain to you how during the, the peak of enslavement, how from the Caribbean, mostly in Barbados, how the influx of all the enslaved people and how it was brought to North America to feed the, what was it that was popular? That it was she said white rice and black beans. Okay. And when she talks about, especially South Carolina, she talks about how they were indigenous people, Indians people. And she has a whole page where she names different groups of indigenous people. And the way English knew the English settlers arrived in North Carolina and were kept pushing indigenous people further by claiming the land. And at some point, it was especially indigenous people that were used to plant or harvest the cornfield. They were the ones being used for cornfields. But then, as soon as they discovered that they were not, I guess, resistant or anything like that, and there was more demands for black bodies straight from Africa, whoa, all of that just surged up. One thing I also wanted to mention here is that Taya Miles says that it's very hard to reconstruct the stories of enslaved people, because she said at some point authors would tell these type of stories or tend to write about the enslavers because there's more information, more records about those people than the enslaved people. So it's really a difficult task to put together a story. And I just wanted to read you guys again a few more quotes here. The number of enslaved migrants who made it from the depths of the cotton and sugar frontiers all the way to the free states probably numbered under 1,000 during all the years of slavery. That amounts to 0.1% of all forced migrants. I mean, this woman even had a picture. I'm gonna go through the pictures that she showed in this book. But at some point in the book, she talks about the auction block. Yo, I had heard about, enslaved people being auctioned, but like in passing, when I would read through it, but not as detailed or actually visualizing what an auction block would look like. Oh my gosh, you guys, I'm not sure if I can find it. I could just picture the way the author described how these new Africans were being taken, and some of them would be, undressed, naked, and you see all these white men that would come and fill them up or open their mouths to make sure that they didn't have disease or anything like that. Some of them had kids, and just imagining, I have imagined, but the way she described it this time, I was like, oh my god. Gosh, there's so much to unpack this, but just remember, it is the story of Ashley Sack. And as I mentioned, she talked elaborately about what the sack meant for enslaved people, not just Ashley. So it was a way for enslaved people to give their children, their loved ones, something to remember them by, because they knew the chances of them to ever see each other was none to zero. Okay, so she talked about why certain of these items was so important. And I want to mention you a little bit that I found interesting, where she talks about some similarities that we found between the Africans and Black Americans who settled in South Carolina. So she says, the little sacks known as conjure bags populated enslaved people's daily lives across the U.S., South, the Caribbean islands, and Latin America. Manufacturing conjure bags fell under the purview of conjurers or root workers, spiritual practitioners in Black folk tradition that borrowed from African religious beliefs, particularly the Congo culture of Central Africa. Y'all know, if you know me, y'all know that that's my country. So I did mention that I would talk to you a little bit more about what she just mentioned, right? So isn't that This is why I feel like I'm drawn to these stories, because I know we share some ancestors, okay? Listen to this. The Bakongo, which is another tribe in my country, the Bakongo version of these conjure bags are known as Mikisi, and that's actually a word that still exists, while the American varieties are often referred to as Grigri bags, hand or mojos. And I will finish here. In Brazil, these African-inspired conjure bags called mandingas contain the kinds of natural elements described above, as well as handwritten notes. And in Islamic-influenced African regions, Grigri bags also contain scraps of paper with writing. Among Bakongo believers, my people, these bags could include terrestrial elements viewed as medicines, including chalk, nuts, plants, soil, stones, and charcoal. And what I found so interesting about these references to Africa is the fact that some of these I know Africans don't probably remember. And I feel like that's why it's important to read these books, because I feel that it's the descendant of these ancestors that lived outside of Africa that did everything to withhold those traditions, to keep those traditions alive. Like if you go to Africa or even ask these Bakongo tribes in Congo, they probably won't even know. Maybe like the old chiefs in the villages would recall using these, Mikisi and stuff like that. But when I saw this, I was like, whoa, I actually have some ancestors in South Carolina, Pretty cool, right? But anyways, this is a tragic story. But like I said, you guys, I could talk to you about this book forever, okay? There's so many things that I have to go over. Let me just show you a bit of the sacks and pictures. And I wanted to also talk more a little bit about the sack, the elements that she talks that are found in the sack. So as I mentioned, it was for people, loved ones, to remember the people that were given those sacks by. And she says the elements found in the sack was because they were durable. They were not perishable elements. So you have a dress, and a dress, the way she describes the depicts womanhood, girlyhood, because at that time Black people were dressed in like rags. When I say rags, like she gave an example, a picture of what Black people, and we've seen pictures, what they wore while they were working the cotton fields. And whenever they had the chance, these enslaved, they would sit by the fire in the dark trying to weave a dress for themselves and for their children. Apart from that, there was like a piece of hair, and the hair, a strand of hair, it means a lot. It has a lot of meanings and a deeper meaning. That also is durable. It also, to remind either the child or whoever is in possession of that, to remember the person who's given that sack by. And there was also pecans, and those she talks about it thoroughly, because the way pecans were planted, it was a whole thing. And those pecans were durable. They went through every season, and it was mostly Black people that knew how to cultivate these pecans, and that's why they were found in sacks, because their journeys, like Ashley, could be long. She didn't know where you would end up, and it was nice to have these pecans. Then it could maybe sustain you while you were traveling. These are some pictures, and these are actually people that have replicated some quilting. And then you have hair, pieces of hair here. You have here Robert Martin House, Charlotte Street, Charleston, South Carolina. I guess an example of houses, how they would look in South Carolina during 1933. There's a Charleston jail. There's a story that she talks about this jail. This dilapidated structure is now a tourist attraction and the purported location of ghost sighting. I wanted to talk about the interactions between Indians and Black people during that time while I find this tam dress. Another picture here. So what I wanted to mention is that what the author also talked about, the interactions between Blacks and Indians, was that at some point, as I mentioned, Indians were the ones working the cotton fields, and then Black rice and stuff like that, until the demands for Black bodies was like it. So I think she said in the 1700s, Indians were like freed, like they were no longer enslaved. Okay, so that meant that now Indians people worked alongside English people to capture fugitives. Not only other Indian fugitives, but also Black fugitives. So even though there was a relation between Indians and Black at that point that could be friendly, there was also at some point in the history when they were also killing or bringing back Black slaves. So as I mentioned, this story is fantastic. I didn't go as far as talking about Ruth, because the story is really about Ashley and the sack and how it was found. So the way this sack was found, I'm gonna conclude here. The way this sack was found is that I think it's a random lady, I don't know where she was going, but then she found this random sack, and instead of, like, I guess she kept it for some time, and then she brought it to like a museum or somewhere where they actually discovered that this sack actually had historical value, and it's somewhere in a museum. So that's how they came across this sack. Like I said, I would talk about this book and I'm missing so much important things. I mean, I tabbed this book up and there's so many important information that we all need to read. Now, I'm not gonna rate this book because it's a non-fictional book, but it is very interesting, and please pick it up. I want to say this, guys. I understand that a lot of us booktubers, when we read books, we want to escape, and it's fantastic. I want to escape just like everybody else, but I also understand the importance of reading these type of books. And to all my white booktubers who actually take the time to not just read books to escape, because this story is all about us, Black and white, okay? We can never separate, right? So it is important when you have a platform to keep the story alive. It's for us to learn and never, ever forget. Okay, so there you have it. Next, I read The American Queen, the story of Luella. Yo, I love this book. I actually enjoy this story. So let me tell you what this story about. It's so weird because I read, like I said, like they all had a common theme. It was based, if it's not South Carolina, it was Texas, but it was during slavery time. But this one is taking time after Reconstruction period. Let me just see. So yeah, it's in 69. So it's definitely after Black people have been freed, okay? And it's during the Reconstruction period. The exact location of where Luella lives, I'm not sure if it's South Carolina, North Carolina, somewhere in Texas. I mean, I'm gonna go back to it and then I'm gonna put it somewhere, the correction of where she lives. But essentially it's the story of Luella, and Luella was enslaved on the Montgomery plantation, and this is actually based on a true story. And she witnessed the death of her father by hanging on an Oakland tree. And it's weird, when I read that tree, I was actually driving by and I felt some type of way about Oakland trees, and I was like, I don't know. But anyways, and once the Black people are freed, Luella has this, she has this dream of leaving that plantation. But before she leaves the plantation, she meets this pastor, and this pastor, he's actually the descendant of the planter of that plantation. So yeah, the enslaver, the planter, has a mixed kid. And funny thing is, that pastor calls his dad master, I guess, as was the language by then. And then the same planter actually has another son who's purely white, and his name is Robert. He's actually Black as well, but he's just more white and can pass for white. And I believe he has another kid too, but we talk about those two sons. So one is a pastor, and Robert basically can go anywhere and do as he please because he can pass for white. So the story with Luella and the pastor is that the pastor is really interested in Luella. He wants to marry her. He's like 20 years her senior. Long story short, they do get married. He has taught her how to read and how to read the Bible and stuff like that. So once they're married, she doesn't feel comfortable staying on that plantation. And there have been threats and things like that. Like at some point they had built, I guess, a cabin or a little church, and it gets burned by the people there. So she talks to him and convinces him that we need to leave. Reverend William, yeah, that's his name. Reverend William is very much a pastor, like a Christian, like a believer. So he's like, we're gonna pray on this and stuff like that. And he prays on it and decides that, you know what, we're gonna go. And what I like about this is that he loved Luella. I love the way she described their love together. And that's what I wanted to talk to you about, you guys. today's modern love is very cute because, you know, it's very free. It's very like, I like you or I don't, like, fuck it, you know. But back then, because of the way their freedom was so limited, they really loved each other deeply, as if, you know, tomorrow was not promised. You know, we hear about this today, but somehow we act like tomorrow is promised. And I find that our relationship today, even if you hear other people, there's such we don't revere marriage or relationship as people did back then, you know. So that's what I wanted to say. I really enjoyed the relation between Luella and William. So they set up this journey to go find the what is it, I guess the happy land, you know, the promised land for Black people. And before morning, there's about 50 people that are ready to go with them. And then as they go on this journey, they discover other people that join them, you know, that are coming from all parts surrounding the North Carolina way. So they meet people, and what they do, they ask them, what are you good at? You know, what was your skill, you know, on the plantation? So a lot of people knew their skills. Either they were smith people, or they knew how to, you know, do certain things, how to build, because they knew that they were going to this land and they were going to need these skills in order to build this town. So one thing I wanted to mention is that she is pregnant. So what trigger, I guess, look for these. I mean, all these slave books they're very triggering. So sorry if I didn't mention that at the beginning, but they're all triggering. But so Luella is pregnant. She is pregnant with her first baby girl, and unfortunately during that journey she does have a miscarriage, and she was really distraught by it. And she has her grandmother and her brother who are there along the journey to help her, you know, trying to heal through the process. So long story short, they see this Oakland tree kind of plantation, but before then there's this event I need to mention. So she sees this oak tree while they're traversing, right? And then she tells everyone like to stop. Literally, she stops everyone. They're like, wow, what's going on? And I want to mention that Robert, William's brother, who can pass for white, they don't get along. They really don't get along. So anyways, she's like, stop. So she sees this oak tree, and there's hanging noose from that oak tree. She gets angry and she tries to pull that, like she goes there and tries to pull the noose off of the tree. And William is like, you know, what are you doing? What's going on? Like, you know, and Robert is like, you know, keep hold of your wife, you know, like, why is she acting crazy? But then the man understood. She's like, I will no longer see and accept this. Every oak tree that has a noose, she will do everything to remove it. So someone comes and, you know, understanding what she's talking about, and then they help her. And oh gosh, this is the part I have goosebumps actually, that actually affected me. She was there and she cried. I actually listened to the audio version of this, and the narrator, that part actually had a nice voice, and I could just imagine these melancholic chants or songs sang by these enslaved people. They were so deep, and the words, and I was just like, oh, so beautiful. And the whole assembly there sang with her, and it was so nice. So anyways, finally they get to this oak plantation plant. There's this old white lady who's there, and then there are these dilapidated cabins, and William or Robert, they go together, since he can pass for white, they go talk to the lady. Luella is there too, and the lady's okay. She's like, okay, you guys can settle on the plantation. There's many oak trees there, so they make a deal with her. They're like, okay, if we cut down all these trees, can we build, you know, houses for each other? That's the contract they have. The old lady is really okay with it. So throughout the years, they will work towards building Happy Land. And at some point, when some of these oak trees have been cut down and there are a couple of houses built, they finally decide to crown Lulu and William king and queen. But unfortunately, tragedy will arise and something will happen to William, and then what happens is that Happy Land will need to continue to be governed, and that falls under Luella and the brother. Oh man, guys, I don't want to tell you everything, but it was pretty hard. So as I mentioned, the relation between Luella and her brother-in-law isn't good. And when they are left to govern this place, we realize that this man is a gambler, Robert. And unfortunately, he will get into debt. And once that occurs, something happens to brother as well, and Luella is kind of left to deal with basically the remnants of this man's gambling habits, and something happens to Happy Land. But essentially what the author was saying was that this is a forgotten story that needed to be told, and I'm so happy she told the story. So now we know about Luella, and she has at the back the characters that truly existed and their real stories and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed this book, and I will rate this story like a 4 out of 5. It was really good. I love the way the author wrote the book, the way she explained the terms being used, because I know today there's some terms that we don't want to be using when it comes to talking about enslaved people, but she said like if she didn't use it, she wouldn't do justice to the story. So I just like that aspect that she did before going into the book. And also this book talked about auctioning of Black people, but yeah. And then I'm actually going to talk to you about this one. Again, I believe this book is set in Texas. Okay, it is Night Wherever We Go by Tracy Rose Beaton. Now this story is actually about a couple of women on a plantation. Let's see, let me just remember. So I'm not gonna remember the names, you guys, but all I know, yes, it's a Texas plantation. So perfect. So as I said, it is the story of these women on these Texas plantation, and the men of that plantation, they named them Lucifer, rightly so. So on that plantation, there's Lucifer with their wife, who's also pretty mean. You know what I realized? Throughout all these books that I've read, and the current book that I'm reading, that I will actually talk to you about obviously in June, I realized that white women then were pretty viciously mean. And the reason why it strikes me is because women are supposed to be nurturing. You know what I mean? Even if you hate a human being, I guess it could be understandable for men, because I don't know. But women are supposed to be emotional. But when you hear the stories of these women back then, oh my God, like you are, whoa, you can almost think that they were meaner than the men. But anyways, let me not diverge, okay? So we're on that plantation. So as I said, the wife is there. She has a couple of kids. And these women obviously live on that plantation and they work the field. Now, what's happening is that these women don't have children. They are childrenless. And this Lucifer guy is trying to have children so he can breed them, so he can have more enslaved people. And you know how you can just understand what he wanted. So unfortunately for him, and fortunately for these women, they had roots, you know, just like we learned in the other book. They had ways, medicines, roots, plants to prevent pregnancies. And they do that for a while. But the only thing is, this person, this Lucifer guy, decides to come up with a genius idea. So he decides to go find 2 men who will be responsible for sleeping with these women. One of them, I think Nan, she's like the oldest one. Like she's the oldest one, so she's spared. And then I think there's Sarah. So I think it's Sarah. But anyway, so one of them is spared because she's older. And then there are 2 that will actually be meant to marry these men and do everything in order to have children. The thing about one of them, I think it's Sarah, okay? I just saw it's Sarah. So the reason why I mentioned Sarah, because we talk more about Sarah's perspective than the other woman's perspective. So Sarah is this young girl on that plantation who's forced to marry one of the men. And obviously she has to give birth to children, like soon. But then what happens is that she falls in love with another man, you know, a Black man that she loves and falls in love with. But she's very young. And all the other women are like, you know, you're going to get over it. And don't be too attached, because they know that love on plantations can never be sustainable, especially among Black people. But she's stubborn and she falls for this man. And this man starts to talk to her about dreams of going to Mexico and, you know, building a land there and stuff like that. But then she's very scared. And you guys have to try to think about the people that were so courageous, knowing that if you ever try to run, the torture, the things that will be done to you if you were ever captured, but yet to still have that courage and be like, you know what, I've got to get my freedom. I'm so grateful for these people and the ones who stay. So anyways, they have a truce between that man and Sarah, because she literally is honest with them. She's like, I don't like you. I have a man, you know, I don't want to be with you and stuff like that. And she does have relations with her lover, with whom she gets pregnant by. But somehow she decides, I guess, to terminate the pregnancy, because you have to understand they don't want to get pregnant because they know the reasons of why Lucifer wants them to have children. So they consult among themselves, the woman, and they're like, okay, listen, if one of us has children, it's gonna start something. At some point, as I said, Sarah does have a child, but then she decides to not pursue or to like end the pregnancy. I think she gets found out by the enslaver. I'll get back to that. But the other couple, so the other woman that had to marry the other man, they have a nice relationship. It's not toxic like the one with Sarah and the other man. So they have like almost a brotherly kind of friendly relationship. And this man actually has another relationship, like another family and stuff like that. And these men, their purpose actually were for, like, they were bought or even borrowed from other plantations in order to go and pregnant and enslaved women so that they could breed or have more children for the plantation, believe it or not. So these men they didn't do it because they wanted to. And you actually do hear their perspective as well of how they left their women and they were threatened. Some of them are like, okay, if you don't do this, we're taking your wife and your children, separating them and bring them to another plantation. So to avoid that, they had to do what they had to do. And some of these women, sometimes they understood that, sometimes they didn't understand that. But, they were all caught in their feelings. Long story short, at some point, they're also not having children. So you know what the enslaver does? He gets drunk one of these days and he's like, you know what? I'm going to make you with a gun. You're going to do it right there and then. The disgrace, the things that were described in here, he makes them do it in front of them. And literally at some point, the man does his wife and he looks at the enslaver, and you can hear how the narrator described how he felt so uncomfortable, almost scared, and like he just keeps going, just looking at him. I was just like, there was just there was never any privacy. Like, what privacy back then for enslaved women, people? Never. They were being followed, breathed on day and night. Oh no. But anyway, so I enjoy this book. I mean, something happens to the woman at the end, and oof, not gonna ruin it for you guys, but it was something. But I enjoyed the writing. So if you haven't read this book, please pick it up. It's very interesting. So this is actually 3.5 out of 5 for me. Then guys, we have actually 4 more books. Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm gonna try to go through them real quick. So guys, I read this book, The House of Rust by Khadija Abdallah Bajaber. She's from Mombasa in Kenya. It's a land in Kenya. Now this is supposed to be like a super natural or realism type of story. Like, let me just tell you a little story about Aisha. So she's the main character in this story, okay? Aisha lives obviously in Mombasa. She's the daughter of this fisherman, okay? And what happens is that one day her father disappears in the sea and there's no one that's willing to go find him. Everybody tells her that, you know what, he's lost, he's been eaten by monsters and all stuff. So she decides that she's gonna be a hero and she's gonna go and find her father. And it's her journey of finding her father where you discover the talking cat, talking sharks and all these monsters, talking blackbirds, and then you have a shapeshifter kind of person there. Now, the only thing is it could get a bit confusing because the way she would transition from a chapter to another chapter, where you had a whole chapter is just animals talking. But then it started well. Like, I was really invested in the story. I thought the premise of the story was interesting because Aisha, when she goes to find her dad and she meets all those monsters, she does succeed in bringing her dad back. But then she's facing a decision. She wants her dad to now go back to the sea because every time he goes to the sea, sometimes he forgets her, sometimes he goes for a long time and all that. So for her to keep him on land, she decides that, you know what, they're going to remove the sea out of him. So they cut him open, and then hence the, super realism or realism effect of that. They cut him open and decide to remove the sea out of them. She feels bad about that decision. At the same time, she lives with her grandmother. Her grandmother tells her that she needs to get married. you also fight those expectations that I guess some of these Kenyan women go through, or Mombasa women go through. So she is expected as a young girl to be married. But then the thing about her family is that her mom, I guess, either had her when I guess she's a bastard child or something like that. But there's also connotations attached to people who are not, I guess, born within the frame family, which is mom and dad and married. You know what I mean? So there's that aspect. And then Aisha's tells her grandmother that I don't want to do that. I don't want to get married. I want to go and travel and, see the world. And this whole battle between her mother, her grandmother, and her. At the same time, you have all these other animals, that are in the mix, and they are scared of Aisha because Aisha is looking for this house of rest. Basically, there was this talking cat that went with her on that journey to find her dad. And the cat is like, okay, you come with me at the house of rest right now, or you don't come. So she decided not to come, but now she feels that she owes her gratitude to this talking cat. But then whenever she goes asking questions literally to goats and those blackbirds, why is the name escaping me? And a bunch of animals. Where do you know about the talking cat? Without a shadow, she finally meets this other being that's really hard to explain. He's like an ancient being, and this ancient being, they play this game, and it's so weird because I actually asked my husband, do you know this game? Because it's a Swahili game, and I like the fact that there were some actually Swahili words that were being used, because y'all know I always say Jambo, Karibu, welcome to my channel, my name is Tina. Yeah, okay, that's a bit Swahili. So I like that aspect. So all these talking animals and this being, they play a game because somehow she wants to trick her grandmother, and he has a deal that he can offer her so that she is able to, I guess, stay Aisha with the grandmother and be this candid and nice girl who's very subservient, very she does what she's supposed to do, and have this other side somehow, because remember, there's magical realism into it, and be this girl that could travel the world, so basically have her cake and eat it too. That's what she wants. So as I said, the story was good, but then there was some confusing aspects, and I actually went on YouTube and decided to listen to the author describe her book and her inspiration and the different topics that were tackled in this book. There's actually a lot more topics. I think she talked about Mombasa. There are these other tribes, and there's always things happening between different tribes. So she tackled that as well. So in my quest to read books, set on the African continent, I wanted to read a book set in Mombasa, Kenya. So why not? I think it's going to be a 2.5 out of 5. It's not terrible. It's very interesting. Even the language, I forgot to talk about the way the language or the words are written is very, I'm not going to say poetic. It's very intricate. It's nice. It's complicated, but in a nice way, in an interesting way. So yeah, so 2.5 out of 5. All right, you guys, we're almost done. 3 more books to go. I know sometimes I can go and ramble on, but I'm one of those different booktubers in a sense that I like to show you guys that I truly read the book from page 1 to the last page. And the way I can show you that is by telling you a little bit more about the contents that you would not find in the synopsis. So that's why sometimes I'm very thorough in my reviews of these books. So please be patient with me, and I'm hoping you're not bored. But anyways, the next book I want to talk to you about is The Jollof Rice and Other Revolutions. Now, so obviously this is a book with short stories. There are multiple short stories in this book, and it's essentially following Nyonso, Aisha, and Remy. So the way the story starts at the beginning, I'm just going to tell you a couple of highlights that that stood out to me throughout the story. So these 3 people are the main characters, and their stories are intertwined together, okay? So first, the way it started is that they're out of school in university, and is it during the Biafran War? It's during one of those Nigerian war, okay? And they are protesting against the school because apparently something happened with the teachers. They were either taken away or something like that, okay? So they are protesting, and obviously, you know how protests can get. It can get out of hand. Something happens to their 4th friend in that group. I forgot her name. Her name is complicated. But something happens. She is arrested, and her friends are like, when the soldiers come to arrest, I guess, some of them, they're all like screaming and telling them that she actually didn't participate and stuff like that. But she gets arrested and she's brought to jail. And unfortunately, she's one of those who has asthma, and she didn't have her, is it EpiPen? Or, yeah, she didn't have her asthma thing. And unfortunately, when she tells them that she needs it, she can't breathe, they don't believe her, and she passes on. So that's like how the story, like, starts tragically. So I want to actually tell you, like, just like I said, a few highlights of the story. So one of the story that is told in this book is Adelma's story. I have to refer to one because, as I said, it's a bunch of stories. So Adelma's story. So Adelma is this Nigerian woman. She's very well off in life. She just can't have a child. So she marries her husband and they're in love, they are really happy. But then unfortunately, how Nigerians family can be sometimes overbearing. So the mom comes and she's like, what have you done to my son? It's been years, I think 2-3 years, and you haven't given him a child. Allow him to have another wife. So she tries to have that conversation with her husband. Her husband's like, no, that is gonna be trouble. I don't want it. No. But then at some point she tries to convince him. I think a year after, they have finally a second wife, and that wife like gives him children like boom, 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 boom. And Adelma is very happy. She takes care of those children like her own, and she helps the woman, I forgot her name, but she helps her to raise the kids. But then at some point, one of her kids falls sick, and the woman, the second wife, accuses her of, I guess, bewitching her kid or pulling a spell on her kid. And Adelma by then knew that the harmony of the household was never going to be the same. Even though he pulls through that sickness, her husband, even the woman, starts to like look at her suspiciously. So she decides that she's just going to leave. She takes her stuff, goes to talk to her dad, and her dad is okay. And what was remarkable about that story is that she has a friend. This friend comes and tells her about her cousin. And apparently this cousin is looking for a wife, but they just don't have the money. And the wife that he wants to have, the family of that wife wants her to marry an older man. Long story short, Adelma decides to help that couple. So basically the way it works is that it's as if Adelma marries the wife, but then she can still see the man, if you understand what I mean. That's the arrangement they have. So that the children that comes from that couple will sort of be her children. So long story short, she has a son that the woman with the man, they have a son, and Adelma is happy. She takes care of that boy like it's hers. Okay. Long story short, something happens and she decides that she has to take that kid away. Now, the reason why I want to talk about this is because as a mom, I understood the need of this woman to have children. Okay, I understand that. I don't understand the part of not being able to conceive. But the length at which she did to have that kid is what's morally not acceptable. Something does happen and she decides to take that kid away, unbeknownst to the mom. Let's just keep it there. So the next story, guys, I want to tell you about from this book is a story that I titled Police Interaction. So it's about this boy who's growing up in the Bronx, and then he's of Nigerian descent. And what happens with him is that his mom still lives in Nigeria, correct? And then his dad lived in the United States. So they were basically working towards coming to the United States. But before that, something happened in Nigeria where there was a soldier whilst he was traveling with his mom. A soldier, not accosted, but like stopped the mom and whipped his mom. And he didn't understand why, but all the soldier was saying was that the president of the government needs to go through something like that. So instead of asking, he just whipped the mom. So that got the young boy, very angry, and he went to that soldier and bit that soldier. And then the mom comes and she literally begs. She's like, okay, please, I beg, do not hit my son. I will take the whipping. And the soldier is like, you're lucky your mom stood up for you, or you would have gotten the whipping of your life. So Anyways, the mom takes her son, sorry, and she's like, "What did you do that? You could have been in trouble." She's like, "Well, he whipped you for no reason. He knew that he was gonna beat him up or something like that." But then his mom was like, she smiled. She's like, "Thank you," because he stood up for her like a man. Long story short, fast forward to the Bronx. He's there trying to show the city to his cousin who just came from Nigeria, and this is where he talks. And I love that because I love to listen to Nigerian books. I love to listen to them. I could read them, but I love to listen to them because of the accent. So at this part, it's actually an American accent, so the narrator is actually American. So he talks about how, arriving in the Bronx, he's driving with his cousin, and then he talks about the daily altercations or daily meetings with the police and black kids. And it was one of those instances where he was driving a nice car, and he tells you how they got a nice car because his mom arrived there. She works in a retirement home. She needs a new car. The old car fell through, as in, was no longer working, so they had to buy a new car. But being two young boys driving in a, I guess, nice car, it's always a point of them being stopped by the police. So he talks about that, and he talks about the interactions with the police and them. And at some point, they just gonna tell them to get out of the car, push them towards the car, and then you can just imagine that whole interaction. So at some point, I think the police is expecting him, I guess, to fight, to like fight back. Like these police are expecting that of these young black men. So he talks about how his father said something important to him. He said, "Nigeria is hard on the body, but America is hard on the mind." And his dad always told them, "Be quiet, like don't fuss, don't fight, just be quiet," okay? So that's what he did. He went against the language that these police people expected of him. And he said the language he refused to speak, such as stops for driving, sitting, loitering while you wait to pick up your sister, shopping, and walking. It just sounded, I guess, familiar stories that we hear that happens in the United States. All right, you guys, so that was just another story. There's another story that happens with I think it's Remy. There's Remy Nyonso, and what's the other name? Was it Aisha? Yes, Aisha. Aisha is, again, their story are intermixed. So Aisha actually is in the United States. She's working to become a lawyer. She meets this white man whose name is Andrew. They struck up a relationship, they're like in love with each other. All is well at the beginning, but then at some point things start to go sour because Andrew loses his job and he starts to pull down Aisha. And what was interesting about her story was that, things, as I said, go sour with Andrew. And then they had moved together, but then she decides to leave Andrew and then go stay with one of her friends. And fast forward, that friend is getting married in, I think she said Poland. Was it Poland? I think it's Poland. So she goes there for the wedding, and she said she did that because her friend invited, and she had welcomed her while she was going through her breakup with Andrew in her home, then rent free and all that stuff. So she kind of owe that to her friend. So she goes there, and the wedding is happening, and unfortunately people don't speak English there, and they're very fascinated with her black skin. Although she's not very black skinned, she does explain her how her parents are, I think she said her mom is like African American Cherokee, and then her dad is like Nigerian, something like that. So she kind of has that exotic kind of mix. So anyway, so she talks about that, and then at some point she meets this man, this random white man. They struck up a conversation. They tell each other how they're all both from the United States and how he grew up in Ghana, and then she kind of assumed like, are you really white? He grew up in Ghana. He explains the whole thing, and then the part about that aspect was that, or this particular story, as I said, was that Aisha decided to become a lawyer because of her friend that had passed away at the beginning of the story I told you. It was never her dream. And I guess she shared what her life had become with that stranger, and I guess come to a realization of some sort that what she had pursued as a career was not really for her. She did that for a friend, as in memory of a friend, I guess, to keep her alive and to keep her dreams alive, but that was never her. So that was actually, the cute thing about Aisha life. But as I said, there are many short stories in the book, but I wanted to share that those stories with you. So in terms of rating, I'll say 3 out of 5. I liked each story. I suggest listening the audio because you get to hear the Nigerian accent. The 3 out of 5, okay? And then I'm gonna talk about this. Hence, my cowboy. Just paying respect to the Black cowboys.
In the brief 40-year period that gave Americans the development of the West, many of the stories about the Black cowboy will never be told. They've been lost in history forever. But like so many times in the building of this great nation, Black contributions were never recorded, even though their achievements were inspiring. The saga of the Black cowboy is yet another example because we were there.
So for this, guys, I'm going to be talking about a couple of cowboys. So I've taken notes, okay? There were a couple of Black different cowboys here that all need to be mentioned. So I've written their stories in point form. So bear with me. So obviously, it's Black cowboys of the Old West, true, sensational, and little-known stories from history by Tricia Martineau Wagner. So the first Black cowboy that we hear of is named J.C. Stalls. So what's particular about J.C. Stalls is that he has a horse that he calls Glass Eye. He's into rodeo. He does the saddle broncs riding, which back then was unparalleled to anything that people had seen. He's very agile. And he's 6 feet tall, 225 pounds. And they spoke of him doing the hula hander. No one wants to see an animal killed. So the reason why I said no one wants to see an animal killed is that you know how Black people were being killed left to right unfleetingly. Like people never, like white enslavers then didn't flinch when it came, to killing Black bodies. But then something happens with one of the horse or the bull with J.C. Stalls. I think he was doing one of those rodeo rides and stuff like that, and something happened to the animal, and the animal got stuck or it suffered, so they had to shoot it, and they had to shoot, I guess, in front of people. And obviously, imagine a crowd full of white people being outraged that, an animal got killed, which is not so much that we could say about them seeing Black people being killed, So that's why I mentioned that. And then he participated in a lot of contests. That's how he made his living. So one of the tricks that he would do while he was on those rodeo bull riding was that he would have to stay on the bronco for the longest. And so one hand must stay on the reins. The horse needed to buck, and that's how come it counted for that particular trick. At the same time, J.C. Stalls faced a lot of racism that he had to overcome, and a lot of white fellow cowboys that worked with them were sort of friends with them, but not the majority of population. And as I said, these stories are very intricate. I'm not going into details, but they talked about how they would go driving cattle from like one ranch to another ranch, from another city to city. You have like Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, Texas, all those places. So also the story of J.C. Stalls is that he was so renowned during his time, and no one had actually really seen a Black cowboy. No one had ever heard. So when they would hear of his adventures or his stories, they would go to the stadium in order to see this Black cowboy, And he died in 1938. Next, we have Ned Hurlison. Ice and Dark. Okay, that's how he was called. So he cooked for soldiers, and it was right after 1865. I believe he was born to slave parents, because he said after emancipation in 1865, a lot of Black people, I guess, had to find work and stuff like that. So he traveled and lived around the southern part of Texas, Mexico area. He worked with cattle and with a lot of Mexican vaquero. He stole horses. So, hey, they never said that all of these Black cowboys were morally good, but yeah. At some point in the story, he's accused of killing a Chinese person, which was not the case. They do find the Chinese person, and he's freed. He was a skillful roper and bronco buster. He joined the gang to steal a large group of horses. So he basically was caught between stealing horses with the Mexican vaqueros and then selling them, and he just lived a life of thieving and being this spectacular rodeo good roper man, a cowboy. Yeah, he traversed all the way to Oklahoma, and that's where he settled. There he met his wife, had kids, and unfortunately there was this white man that was called the Bounty Killer, and he would go around writing and giving warning to these, I guess, lawless cowboys and take care of them. Like, he was above the law. And unfortunately, Eisenhart met his death at the hand of this bounty killer. Then we have the story of Boss. He was born in Mississippi. He left for Texas. And the one thing I want to mention this is that throughout the story of all these cowboys, they talk about their interactions with Indians. Back then, that was it. And sometimes when you read some of these sentences and wording, you just like, you flinch because you're like, ooh, that won't go like the way you talk about Indians today. But they talk about their interactions with Indians. There was always a lot of fights between blacks, whites, Indians, and most of the time it would be white and black against the Indians, especially when we talk about cowboys. He was a good fighter. There were 3 of them, and he was friends with a Goodnight and Loving. Those were the name of the 2 cowboys. So you would hear of Boss, Goodnight, and Loving. They sold beef. At some point in later years, he settled in Winterford with a wife and 6 children. So that's the story of Boss. And then we have Nat Love. Nat Love was also called Deadwood Dick. Was born a slave in Nashville, Tennessee. He made $100, I think. He bought a horse, and then I think he exchanged it for something, got $50, and then somehow he had a total of $100. 50 he gave to his mom, and then 50 took and just kind of left with it. And he was 15 years old, left for Kansas. Lots of wars again between Indians and cowboys. He was a skilled roper. Fought a lot of gun battles in Arizona, drove cattle. So cowboys then, did a lot of horse riding, cattle riding, and stuff like that. So he would drive cattle all the way to Wyoming, Nebraska, Colorado, New Mexico. And then at some point they were captured by Indians. There were like some fatalities, but he also suffered, like, when he talks about his story, because it's actually a book that he himself wrote, he talks about all the bullets that he sustained. Apparently he sustained 14 bullets and survived them all. He opened a farm, and at that time the railroad was booming during that period. So he became a porter for 15 years and lived the rest of his life in South Carolina. Then we have Robert Lemons. He was a slave, of course, may have had Indian blood. He was freed at 17. He was known for mustanging. When I would think of Mustang, I would never have associated with a horse, although you do see the sign of the horse for those Mustang. I just never really connected the dots, so excuse me, but I'm learning a lot of things. He says, so what was really, I guess, renowned about his life was that he had to become a horse. Like, he acted like a horse, became a horse in order to do the whole Mustanging. He lived on a ranch, took care of sheep, goats, and Mustang. He also faced racism. He had 8 children and married a Mexican woman. That's the story of Lemons. And then we have Pickett. So Pickett was known for bulldogging. So apparently he had Caucasian, Native American, and African blood in him. He was a rodeo entertainer from 1905 to 1935. He worked with the Miller brother, 10100. I guess it was one of this show that was really popular then. He went from Chicago to New York, Canada, imagine that, South America, and Great Britain. Apparently he even met royalty back then. Yeah. And he became the first Hollywood black actor. He was 62 when he died. And the way he died apparently was that he was just doing what he does best, taking care of one of the horses, and I guess a horse got spooked and unfortunately trampled him, and he got a concussion of the head that he never recovered from. And apparently he's inducted in the city's Oklahoma Rodeo of Fame. So, right? Isn't that an interesting piece of history? So next, the story of Jim Perry was that he did everything. Again, on the ranch, he was a roper, rider, bronc buster. He was a cook and musician. He was one of the best riders. He owned 150,000 cattle and 1,000 horses. He lived on the ranch that had 150,000 cattle and 1,000 horses. There were 150 cowboys on that XIT ranch. Unfortunately for him, because he was black, he was not allowed to compete against whites. So he stayed at the XIT for 2 decades, and unfortunately, back then, a lot of black cowboys wanted to aspire to be higher than, just a regular rancher or rodeo. And what was high then was to become a cook. He was a culinary genius, and apparently the XIT was really like in its peak from 1885 to 1912. He then married a 27-year-old woman. He lived with that woman, but unfortunately, they did not have kids. The way he died was that, unfortunately, he had, I think, a brain tumor, something that happened to his brain. And unfortunately, he did not make it. He was transported to a Canadian clinic, and he was 60 years old. Unfortunately, as I said, he didn't make it, and he's buried in an all-white cemetery. Apparently, the only black cowboy then to be buried in an all-white cemetery. Then we have the story of Charlie Willis. Charlie Willis, who at 24, he left for Georgetown, Texas. He was born into slavery, and apparently what was so spectacular about him is that he had straight hair and light skin. But he worked with the Willis and other cowboys. Charlie had a nice soothing voice. He played musical instruments such as a harmonica, guitar, banjo, and a fiddle. He wrote many songs and sang these songs alongside the trail. So basically what he did was that whenever they would go on those long trails with their cattle and horses, he would entertain the cowboys with his songs. And what I learned that we already knew is that it said he learned these songs. Actually, most of these cowboys, the songs that they were singing, they learned it from church hymns and songs that were derived from plantations, melodies, and some Irish as well. So the songs dealt with every kind of subject that surrounded cowboys. So stampedes, death, horses, cattle, ranch, all those kind of stuff. And apparently, cowboy songs were passed down generation to generation. One of the songs that Charlie Willis is most notably known for is named Goodbye Old Pain. And there's actually the lyrics of the song in the book. And it was sang by many people that interpreted that song. The author also talks about how back then black people's inventions unfortunately were usurped by white people, but for him that song was always attributed to him, so lucky. He also taught this white boy called Jess his song, who later on played that song, and a lot of people thought it was Jess who kind of invented the song, but Jess only adapted that song to the fiddle. That song has been indicted or put in the American Folklife, establishment, which was established in 1976. He was married to Laura Davis. They had a couple of children, like 6, I think. And apparently, whenever he faced a lot of turbulence or a lot of adversity, he really held on to his faith, God. He died at the age of 80 in 1930. And he has a lot of relatives till today. So I guess by the time this book was written, she said he had almost 500 relatives across America. Isn't that crazy? And then we have Daniel Webster Wallace. So Daniel Webster Wallace was born to enslaved parents, of course. His mom was a wet nurse to the planter's wife. He worked as a slave, but the Civil War happened and obviously they were emancipated. He was hired by Carr and worked for some. He was a wrangler, roper. He was called 80 John, and at some point he was ambushed by Indians, but survived. He was rancher at 25 years old. He went to a segregated school. He married Laura D, and he increased his land and managed 200,000 acres of land. As I said, back then the railroad was becoming popular, so cattle life and ranching life, was slowly disappearing. At some point, because of that, he had accumulated debt, so he sold off his cattle to pay off debts. He hired black and white cowboys on his ranch, and apparently he was known as an astute businessman. Back then, black rancher was unheard of. He survived the Great Depression by selling beef back then. He built a house, had 4 children, 2 daughters became college professors. Their son was in charge of managing the ranch. He also was known to donate money to build black schools and churches, even donated to a white church. Even white churches that obviously were segregated and black people couldn't attend. Wallace Ranch is still operative and run by the family. Now, I'm not sure if it's run today, but I think as of when the book was written. He died at 79 in 1939. Then we have George, who was born into slavery. So the story of George was that his father saved to gain his freedom, and he was working on different plantations to accumulate money to free the rest of his family. But emancipation happened, and his whole family was freed. So on the trail, he assisted the cook. He purchased cowboy's outfit because he really enjoyed the look of cowboy outfits. He arrived in New Mexico, did a lot of things there, learned a lot. He was really an avid learner. That's what George was. He was really interested in collecting artifacts. He also took over the ranch at the Owens, taught a lot of other cowboys there. He was an avid reader, like us, us booktubers, book lovers. Apparently, one of these days, something happened, an erosion happened on his land, and then dug a large white bone. And that large bone, he tried to go to other archaeologists and present that bone to tell them that it's not it was not a recent animal kill, and like it looked like it could be like a couple of thousand years old. But unfortunately, because he was an amateur, he was black, no one wanted to pay attention to him until it was late. So Howard was one of those collectors. He was interested, did show interest, just never pursued that interest, never went on that ranch to see the bone. So unfortunately, George never married because apparently on that where he lived, there was no black woman. And he died at 71 in 1922. And unfortunately, finally, when people decided to go dug that area, they found many bones, and they found that he was actually right. That bone apparently was a bone of, I think they said like an old bison. Like they found a spear that was embedded in the bison's rib, or the bones of the bison's rib, which meant that there were humans on that land 2,000 years prior. And I guess they didn't want to believe that a black amateur person could have sort of found such a remarkable piece of information. But he has been given credit after that. So in 1972, 50 years after his death, he was recognized for unearthing the bison bone. So there you have it. Before I actually conclude this video, I think I'm just gonna cut it in two because, oh my gosh, this is so long. I also read The Shadow of the Wind. It was a pick by the book club, and I actually enjoyed that book. It was mystery, it was thriller. It's the story of Daniel. So it's a story within a story. You have Daniel, basically the narrator, and telling us the story, and the story starts with him finding this book called And the Shadow of the Wind. We find out about Julian Carax, and Julian Carax has this love story with Penelope, and it's basically this forbidden story that is said in that Shadow of the Wind book. And Daniel finds the book and finds out that everybody wants the book, but there's also one particular person that wants this book and basically burn that book. So along his journey to discover why this book needs to be burned, he's gonna meet many characters, including Fermin, Nuria, Mikhail, like just very different personalities. And my favorite of those characters was Fermin. He was the best, and he just go on many adventures. And this story, from page to page, I found it very interesting. I listened to the audio, and I suggest, because the narrator does a good job of having the proper accents. And this story is set in the 1940s in Barcelona. So that's basically all the books that I read for the month of May. My gosh, it feels like I read a lot of books. It's just that I talked a lot, you guys. I mean, these books were really exciting. I think I had a good reading month. I'm really happy with all the books I read. So there you have it, you guys. Thank you so much for sticking with me. Thank you so much for continuing to be subscribed to my channel. I really appreciate it. We're growing, and thanks to you guys, So yeah, so on this note, I wish you a fantastic beginning of the week, and I hope to see you in my next video. So please don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and share. And I'll see you next time. Ciao.